So today I'm going to be talking to you about my September wrap-up. September was just a mediocre month for me as far as reading goes. I only read 6 books and not one of them was a 5-star read. For the most part, they were just okay, just middle of the road. Nothing was a standout. I enjoyed them. There was nothing extraordinary about them. So let's get right into this stack. Okay, so the first book I picked up this month was When in Rome by Sarah Adams, and this was a romance. It was good. It was cute. It features the main character, Ray Rose, who is a musician, and she is sick of her life. She feels like it's spinning out of control and she can't really do anything about it. So one night she takes off, doesn't tell anyone where she's going, and she ends up driving to Rome, Kentucky, and her car breaks down in the front yard of Noah Walker. And of course, they strike up a love, and it was a cutesy romance. I did enjoy the fact that it was closed door. Closed door romances are my preference because I think it's self-explanatory why closed door romances are my preference. But anyway, I loved the small town vibe. I loved the musical references and the movie references in here. And it was a cute book. Nothing groundbreaking, not a 5-star read for me, but it was an enjoyable read for sure. The next book I read was Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann, and this is a nonfiction. I read it for my in-person book club, and I have to say, I thought I would enjoy this book so much more than I did. The topic it was covering was easily 5 stars because it was so interesting and I knew nothing about it. The execution was about a 3-star. So this covers the Osage murders, and this was a period of history that I knew nothing about. I mean, I knew about the Trail of Tears and stuff, but as we were talking in our book club, several of the girls and I were talking about how this was kind of just glossed over, this time period in our American history. And I wish that wasn't the case, because it was a terrible time. And it was so interesting that all of these Native Americans were getting murdered for their oil rights that they had from their land. So like I said, the topic, 5 stars. It was so interesting, but the execution, it was such an interesting story, but the way that it was written almost bored me. And it was weird because it just felt so detached, I guess because it was a nonfiction. But I felt like the length of this was also a problem. I felt like the information that he had when he wrote the book was so little that he stretched it out too far. I feel like this could have been condensed, honestly, into a newspaper article or, a research paper type length book, and it be totally interesting and intriguing. There is a movie coming out this month, actually, based on the book, and I don't know if I want to see it. I feel like it would be extremely interesting, and I feel like this would be one of those instances where the movie is in fact better than the book. However, it is rated R, and I know that the language in it and the violence in it will probably be an issue. So the jury's still out if I'm going to watch the movie or not, but we'll see. Okay, so the next book I read was The Big Four by Agatha Christie, and this was a Poirot novel, and I'm trying to read them in order outside of holiday themed ones or whatever. And right now I'm reading Murder on the Orient Express again, but I'm reading it aloud with my kids for the first time and they're really enjoying it. But anyway, so The Big Four was probably my least favorite Agatha Christie that I've read to date. It didn't feel like Poirot. It felt more like an espionage novel. And it just felt so outlandish because Poirot is trying to save the entire world from 4 supervillains. Like, it was just so strange, and it was not the murder mystery vibe that all of the other Agatha Christie books I've read have been. And so I didn't know that going in, and it really threw me for a loop a little bit because I was not expecting it. So I really honestly did not enjoy that book at all, which is unfortunate because it's the only Agatha Christie book I haven't enjoyed. Thankfully, it was a library book. I don't feel the need to add it to my personal collection or anything. So yeah, I mean, if you're gonna read a Poirot, I would not recommend The Big Four at all. So the next book I picked up was Red Rising by Pierce Brown, and I'm not really sure how I feel about this book. I talked a little bit about that in my October TBR video because I picked up the sequel from the library. And I think I'm going to continue with the series because people have told me that they think I'll enjoy the second book more. But I don't know. I mean, this was so violent. It was such a violent book. And I feel like a lot of times the violence took away from the story, and it almost made me, because it was just kind of graphic, I kind of detached myself and I didn't really absorb the story because I didn't want to read about all of the violence. But this is about Darrow, who lives on Mars, and he lives underground, and he has to drill down for something, like mine. He's a miner, and he has to mine for things, and his people are enslaved, and he comes to realize that he does not like his station in the world, and he wants to rise above it for himself, but more so for his people, his family. And so he does. So this was pitched to me as The Hunger Games on Mars, and that sounded, really cool. And I could see why people would pitch it like that. But it was just, the storytelling was not nearly as immersive as The Hunger Games. The world building was not there. I felt detached a lot of the time from the characters and their motivation on why they chose to do the things that they did. And I don't know, this was just an okay read for me. But I've heard good things about book 2 and 3, so I am going to continue the series. So we'll see. Hopefully it gets better from here on out for me. We'll see. Okay, so after Red Rising, I needed a palate cleanser. And so thankfully, I had pre-ordered this. It came in the mail. This is the 4th installment of the Thursday Murder Club. And it's The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman. And it was just what I needed after Red Rising. It was the cozy mystery vibe that you would expect from the Thursday Murder Club. And I just love these old people so much. When I grow up, and if I am in a old people home, I want to have friends like Joyce and Elizabeth and all of them, because they're just so fun. So this one is a little bit more sad in places than the other books have been. There are some things that happen within the 4 friends on a personal level that really, I mean, Savannah Grace looked over as I was reading this book one day and she's like, "Are you crying?" And I was crying. But an old friend of theirs has died, and so they're investigating his murder. And of course they're sticking their noses in where they shouldn't, but they're getting the job done as usual. And so it involves a lot of antiques and drug smuggling and just, the normal cozy mystery that you would expect from Richard Osman at this point. So this was my favorite book of the month, probably. It was lighthearted, but it was also very moving at times, and I've become attached to these characters over the course of this series. And if you haven't read the Thursday Murder Club yet, I would recommend it. So the last book I read this month was a novella set in the Cosmere called Six of the Dusk by Brandon Sanderson. And this features Six of the Dusk, and he's a trapper on an island where pretty much anything can kill you. And trappers are kind of like a dying breed. There are not a lot of them anymore, and the world is changing, and it's changing too quickly for Six of the Dusk and his liking. And so this felt like almost like a look at technology versus the preservation of nature type thing. And it was really enjoyable. The world was very interesting. The creatures on the world were extremely weird and extremely interesting. And the relationship they had with Six of the Dusk and how they kind of had a symbiotic relationship kind of was extremely interesting. The only thing that I found fault with is I didn't see how this fit in the Cosmere. I'm not really sure why it was recommended to read it between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. But I'm glad I read it because, like I said, the world was extremely interesting. The creatures were cool, and it was an intriguing story from start to finish. It was less than 100 pages, so it was a very short novella, but I'm glad I read it. Okay, so those are the books that I read this month. Like I said, I had kind of a mediocre month in September, and I'm hoping October will treat me a little bit better. So far, not so good, but we'll see how the rest of the month goes. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.